The satellite images were taken Monday, published by Reuters this morning. Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. And they show something Iran tried to hide but cannot. According to Reuters analysis published 4 hours ago, based on satellite imagery from multiple commercial providers, including Planet Labs and Vantor, Iran has built what the Institute for Science and International Security calls a, quote, concrete sarcophagus over a new facility at the Parchin military complex 30 kilometers southeast of Tehran, and then buried that concrete structure under soil. According to forensic imagery analyst William Goodhind of Contested Ground, cited in the Reuters report, the roof, quote, has most likely been covered with dirt to obscure the concrete color, not to protect it, to hide it, from satellites, from inspectors, from the B-2 bombers' targeting systems. This is not routine construction. This is racing against time. And the time they are racing against is the weeks-long bombing campaign that 2 Pentagon officials leaked to Reuters 4 days ago. Iran is fortifying, fast, before the mops fall. In 30 seconds, I will show you exactly what ISIS founder David Albright said about Iran stalling the Geneva talks, and why every day Iran delays is another day of concrete being poured and soil being packed over facilities that were visible 3 weeks ago and are invisible today. Here is what the satellites captured, and when, because the timeline is the story. November 14th, 2025. Satellite imagery shows the Parchin Talagan 2 facility with what appears to be a metallic roof. Visible, identifiable, targetable, December 13th, 2025. The facility is partly covered. Concrete work has begun. February 16th, 2026, just 2 days ago. According to Reuters, the facility, quote, cannot be seen at all, hidden by what experts say is a concrete structure. 3 months, from visible metallic roof to completely buried under concrete and soil. That is not scheduled construction. That is emergency hardening. Executed while negotiations continue in Geneva. While Iran's foreign minister tells the BBC the ball is in America's court. While dump trucks and cement mixers work around the clock at Parchin, transforming a facility that Israel reportedly bombed in October 2024 into something that might survive the next strike. And Parchin is not alone. According to the same Reuters analysis, at the Isfahan nuclear complex, one of the 3 uranium enrichment plants bombed by the United States in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, all 3 tunnel entrances are now, quote, completely buried. Not damaged, not partially covered, completely buried. According to ISIS reporting cited by Reuters, satellite images from February 9th stated, quote, a 3rd entrance had also been backfilled with soil, meaning all entrances to the tunnel complex were now completely buried. February 10th, images confirmed it. All 3 entrances gone, inaccessible from above ground, hardened against airstrikes, and according to ISIS analysis, designed to, quote, make ground access in a special forces raid to seize or destroy any highly enriched uranium that may be housed inside difficult. Ground access difficult, meaning even if American special forces land at Isfahan, which the USS Miguel Keith Expeditionary Sea Base with special forces embarked could enable, the tunnel entrances are buried under tons of soil. Excavation required before entry, time required before access, time that allows Iran to move material, time that allows Iran to destroy evidence, time that neutralizes the element of surprise that makes special operations viable. Iran is not just building defenses, Iran is eliminating options. The option to strike from the air faces hardened concrete and buried facilities. The option to raid from the ground faces backfilled entrances requiring excavation. Every day of delay is another day Iran reduces America's military options to the most destructive and least precise alternatives. And at Pickaxe Mountain, the tunnel complex, approximately 2 kilometers from Natanz, the site I have covered in previous scripts as Iran's deepest underground facility under construction, ISIS reported on February 9th, according to Reuters, quote, ongoing efforts since February 10th to harden and defensively strengthen 2 entrances. Since February 10th. 8 days ago. Imagery shows, quote, ongoing activity throughout the complex related to this effort involving the movement of numerous vehicles, including dump trucks, cement mixers, and other heavy equipment. Dump trucks, cement mixers, heavy equipment, moving continuously at Pickaxe Mountain for 8 days while Geneva talks continue. While Iran's negotiators discuss sanctions relief and technical details with Steve Witkoff, while Iran's IRGC fires missiles into Hormuz. Construction does not stop for diplomacy. Fortification does not pause for negotiations. Iran is building and talking simultaneously, using every hour of diplomatic delay to harden facilities against the military action that follows if diplomacy fails. And this is exactly what ISIS founder David Albright wrote on X, quoted in the Reuters report. Quote, stalling the negotiations has its benefits. Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, Iran has been busy burying the new Talagan 2 facility. More soil is available and the facility may soon become a fully unrecognizable bunker. providing significant protection from aerial strikes. Stalling the negotiations has its benefits. That sentence is the most important strategic assessment published today, because it reveals Iran's dual-track calculation explicitly. Negotiate in Geneva, stall when necessary, use the time bought by stalling to fortify, and every meter of concrete poured, every ton of soil packed, every tunnel entrance buried, increases the cost of the military option America threatens if negotiations fail. Make the military option harder, more expensive, more destructive, more likely to fail, until the military option becomes politically unviable, and Iran gets a deal on terms it can accept. Or no deal at all, but facilities hardened enough to survive whatever comes. Wait, before I show you what the satellite imagery reveals about Iran's priorities, because missile bases were repaired faster than nuclear sites, let me tell you the specific detail about the Parchin facility that makes every nuclear weapons analyst in the world focus on one number, 36 meters. According to ISIS analysis cited in the Reuters report, satellite imagery shows what appears to resemble, quote, a long cylindrical chamber, maybe a high explosives containment vessel, likely measuring approximately 36 meters long and 12 meters in diameter, placed inside a building at Parchin Talagan 2. 36 meters long, 12 meters in diameter. Those dimensions are not arbitrary. High explosives containment vessels of that size serve one primary purpose in nuclear weapons development: testing the conventional explosive lenses that compress fissile material in a nuclear bomb's implosion design. The explosives that surround the plutonium or highly enriched uranium core and detonate with microsecond precision to create the shockwave that triggers nuclear fission. ISIS noted in its analysis that high explosive containment vessels, quote, can also be used in many other conventional weapons development processes. True, technically correct, but a 36-meter cylindrical chamber is not conventional weapons scale. It is nuclear weapons scale. Western intelligence, according to Reuters, has suggested Tehran carried out tests relevant to nuclear bomb detonations at Parchin more than 2 decades ago. Iran has always denied it. But Iran does not build 36-meter high explosives containment vessels, house them in specialized buildings, and then cover those buildings with concrete sarcophagi and bury them under soil if the facility is innocent research. Iran is protecting something at Parchin that it believes is worth the expense and exposure of emergency hardening visible from commercial satellites. And what it is protecting, based on the 36-meter chamber dimensions and the site's history and the speed of the burial operation, is most likely a facility designed to develop the conventional explosive components required for a nuclear weapon implosion design. This is why the concrete sarcophagus matters beyond military targeting implications. It is evidence of intent. You do not bury a facility this aggressively unless what is inside is either valuable enough to protect or incriminating enough to hide. At Parchin, it is probably both. Now, let me show you what the timeline of missile base repairs versus nuclear site repairs reveals about Iran's strategic prioritization. Because this pattern, visible in satellite imagery analyzed by multiple sources, including the New York Times 2 weeks ago, and confirmed in today's Reuters analysis, tells you exactly what Iran fears most and what it is preparing for. According to the New York Times satellite analysis from February 6th, examining 24 sites hit during the June Israel-Iran war, repairs at multiple missile-related locations began soon after the strikes. The Shiraz South Missile Base, according to today's Reuters report, shows reconstruction of the main logistics and command center. A comparison of images from July 3, 2025 and January 30, 2026 shows, quote, reconstruction and clearance efforts complete. The base near Qom, according to Reuters, citing analyst William Goodhind, had roof repairs begin on November 17th and finish approximately 10 days later. The roof was fully restored by late November. Missile bases repaired in weeks or months. Nuclear sites still showing visible damage above ground 8 months after strikes. Why? According to John P. Caves III of the U.S. National Defense University's Center for the Study of Weapons of Mass Destruction, quoted in the Times analysis, threatening, quote, Israel and U.S. bases and allies in the region with missile attacks is one of Iran's few options to deter repeat strikes on its nuclear facilities. The logic is explicit. Repair missiles first, because missiles provide deterrence against strikes on nuclear sites. Deterrence comes from the credible threat of retaliation. Retaliation requires operational missile launch capabilities, so Iran repaired missile bases immediately after June strikes, while nuclear site damage remained visible for months. And only now, 8 months later, as the threat of a second American strike campaign intensifies, is Iran rushing to harden and bury nuclear facilities. The missile repairs were preparation. The nuclear fortification is response to the specific leaked plan for weeks-long bombing that 2 Pentagon officials told Reuters targets, quote, Iranian state and security facilities, not just nuclear infrastructure. Weeks long, not one night. Weeks, which means Iran cannot simply absorb the damage and rebuild afterward like it did in June. Weeks-long campaigns targeting state and security facilities aim to destroy Iran's capacity to govern, to command, to retaliate. And the only defense is making facilities so hardened that even weeks of bombing cannot eliminate them completely. This is the race the satellite imagery documents. America leaked weeks-long campaign plans Saturday. Iran has been hardening since February 10th or earlier. Dump trucks, cement mixers, soil, concrete, burying tunnel entrances, covering buildings, creating defensive layers, using every hour before the campaign starts. Now let me show you the specific numbers that make Iran's fortification sprint both remarkable and insufficient, because the timeline from visible facility to buried facility reveals exactly how fast Iran can harden when threatened, and how limited that hardening is against the weapons America has positioned. Parchin Taligan, 2 facility, visible metallic roof, November 14th, partly covered December 13th, completely buried by concrete and soil, February 16th. 94 days, 3 months. From visible to invisible. The construction timeline required, according to imagery analysis, continuous concrete pouring, curing, steel reinforcement, waterproofing, backfilling with soil, and grading to match surrounding terrain. 94 days to transform a building into a bunker that commercial satellites cannot identify without comparative imagery showing what was there before. Isfahan tunnel entrances. ISIS reported new burial efforts in late January. 3rd entrance backfilled by February 9th. All 3 entrances completely buried by February 10th. Approximately 2 to 3 weeks to bury 3 tunnel entrances that had stood open for years, each entrance covered with tons of soil, graded, landscaped, made unrecognizable, pickaxe mountain tunnel hardening. Ongoing effort since February 10th, according to ISIS. 8 days of continuous dump truck, cement mixer, and heavy equipment activity visible in satellite imagery as of February 18th. 8 days. And continuing. These timelines are fast. Extraordinarily fast for engineering work of this complexity and scale, but they are not fast enough to defeat the massive ordnance penetrator. The MOP, 30,000 pounds, designed to penetrate 60 feet of reinforced concrete before detonation, does not require knowing precisely where the facility is. It requires knowing approximately where the underground complex sits, the GPS coordinates of the mountain. The bombs penetrate. They find the void space. They detonate inside the hardened facility. Concrete and soil on top of a concrete structure may defeat satellite observation. It does not defeat a bunker buster bomb traveling at near supersonic velocity, engineered specifically to destroy deeply buried facilities. Iran is hardening against reconnaissance and against less sophisticated weapons, not against MOPs. Because nothing Iran can build in 94 days defeats a weapon America spent over a decade engineering specifically for this scenario, which means the fortification is serving a different purpose. Not military, diplomatic. Iran is creating the visible impression of invulnerability, concrete sarcophagi, buried entrances, hardened tunnels, heavy construction. The imagery broadcasts to the world. Iran is ready. Iran is prepared. Striking Iran will be harder, more costly, more destructive than you think. This message is not aimed at American B-2 pilots. It is aimed at American voters, Gulf Arab governments, European allies, and anyone else whose political will might be undermined by the perception that strikes against Iran will be difficult, prolonged, and potentially unsuccessful. The hardening is strategic communication, made visible through commercial satellites that Iran knows are watching. Because if Iran wanted to harden in secret, construction would happen inside the tunnels, not at the entrances, not with dump trucks and cement mixers visible from space. The visibility is the point. The message is, we are preparing. We expect you to strike, and we believe we will survive. And survival is the calculation that matters for Iran's regime, not victory, survival. If Iran's nuclear program and state institutions survive weeks of bombing, even in damaged form, Iran wins strategically. Because the bombing will have international political costs America must absorb. Gulf Arab governments angry about Hormuz disruption. Asian governments suffering oil supply shocks, European governments facing another refugee crisis if regional war escalates, Russia and China criticizing American unilateralism. The international coalition that supported sanctions fractures. Iran survives, isolated but functional, still governed, still producing oil, still supporting proxies, still enriching uranium in facilities that took damage but were not completely destroyed. That outcome, from Iran's perspective, is worth 94 days of emergency concrete work, worth burying tunnel entrances, worth the visibility of construction that announces Iran's preparations. Because if the fortification creates even 10% more doubt in Washington about whether strikes will achieve objectives, the political calculation shifts toward more diplomacy and less military action. This is Iran's bet, and the satellite imagery showing that bet being placed right now, today. as Geneva talks continue, as America's carriers surround Hormuz, as two anonymous Pentagon officials have leaked that weeks-long operations against Iranian state and security facilities are being planned. The USS Gerald R is 6 days from arriving in the Arabian Sea. It left the Caribbean 10 days ago. Approximately 2,300 miles remain. At 34 knots, arrival, February 24th or 25, the USS Abraham Lincoln is already on station, 150 miles from Iran's coast, with Sentinel-2 satellites confirming its position. The 6 B-2 Spirit bombers at Diego Garcia have been there since before the crisis escalated. The 112 C-17 Globemaster cargo aircraft delivered supplies to forward bases weeks ago. The 17 F-15E Strike Eagles at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan have been there since early February. Everything America positioned for a weeks-long campaign is in place. Everything Iran can fortify before that campaign starts is being fortified right now. Dump trucks working, cement mixers pouring, soil being packed, 36-meter-high explosives, containment vessels being buried under concrete sarcophagi, tunnel entrances disappearing beneath tons of backfill. And in Geneva, the talks continue. According to Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqaieh yesterday, discussions have reached, quote, sanction relief and technical details. Progress, not agreement, but subject matter that must be discussed before any deal exists. David Albright said stalling the negotiations has its benefits for Iran. Every day of stalling is another day of concrete, another day of hardening, another day before the MOPs drop. Iran is using diplomacy as construction schedule. Talk, delay. Harden, repeat. Until facilities that were targetable in November are buried by February, until the military option Trump threatens requires destroying infrastructure, Iran has deliberately buried under civilian visible construction that makes post-strike damage assessment and international justification more complicated. This is the race documented in satellite imagery published this morning. America planning weeks of bombing. Iran spending weeks hardening, both sides preparing for the outcome where Geneva fails, where the carrier's presence transitions from diplomatic leverage to operational staging, where the B-2s receive launch authorization, where the $100 million MOP replacement contract signed 11 days ago proves immediately necessary because the current inventory gets expended against concrete sarcophagi that Iran built while negotiators talked about sanctions relief and technical details. 24 days remain on Trump's one-month deadline from February 12th, March 12th. The Ford arrives in 6 days. The concrete sarcophagus over Parshin Talagan 2 is complete. The Isfahan tunnel entrances are buried. Pickaxe Mountain hardening continues. The missile bases are repaired and operational. The IRGC Navy commander said 2 days ago that the weapons used in real war are different from those displayed in drills. And this morning, 4 hours ago, Reuters published satellite imagery showing exactly what Iran has been doing while talking, while stalling, while buying time measured in concrete. 94 days from visible to buried. Weeks-long campaigns planned to strike buried targets, and satellite imagery showing both sides racing toward the same deadline. One side hardening, one side loading. Both preparing for the moment, Geneva produces nothing, and preparation becomes execution. The concrete is still being poured at Pickaxe Mountain today, and the mops are loaded on B-2s at Diego Garcia today. And 24 days remain before Trump's deadline, before fortification meets firepower, before hardening meets penetration, before Iran discovers whether 94 days of emergency concrete work defeats 30 years of American bunker buster bomb development. The satellites captured it all: the dump trucks, the cement mixers, the buried tunnel entrances, the concrete sarcophagus, the soil covering, and the question that the imagery cannot answer, but the next 24 days will. Was it enough? But let me show you exactly what is happening inside the Geneva talks right now, because Iran's fortification sprint and the diplomatic timeline are synchronized deliberately. And what Iran's negotiators are saying reveals why the concrete being poured at Pickaxe Mountain and the discussions about sanctions relief in Switzerland are two parts of the same strategy. According to multiple reports from the Geneva talks, Iran's position has shifted incrementally since Monday. Not on missiles. Iran maintains missiles are, quote, in no way negotiable, neither now nor at any time in the future. That red line has not moved. But on enrichment levels, verification protocols, and timeline for sanctions relief, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Bagheri Khani has signaled what one Western diplomat described at Times of Israel as, quote, one step forward and two hiding behind. Aye, forward on accepting some form of enrichment cap below weapons grade, hiding behind on the timeline and verification details that make any cap enforceable. This is the dance Iran needs Geneva to perform. Show enough flexibility that Trump cannot claim talks failed. Show enough resistance that Iran's hardliners see strength. Use every day of talks to pour more concrete. Until the military option, Trump threatens faces fortified targets that make the operation more destructive, more prolonged, more costly than the political will supporting it can sustain. And America knows this. According to sources familiar with the talks, Witkoff's instructions from Trump are explicit. Progress by end of this week. Not promises, not frameworks. Progress. Specific enrichment numbers, specific verification authorities, specific sanctions relief schedules. That's the deliverables that let Trump call it a deal. Without those deliverables by Friday or Saturday, the carrier deployment, the leaked weeks-long campaign plan, the F-15Es in Jordan, all of it transitions from diplomatic pressure to operational preparation. This is why Iran is racing. Not because strikes are certain. Because strikes become probable if Geneva produces nothing by week's end. And week's end is 3 days away. And the concrete sarcophagus at Parchin was completed by February 16th, 2 days before the Geneva deadline. The Isfahan tunnel burials were complete by February 10th. Before Geneva even started, Iran front-loaded its hardening, built its defenses before the diplomatic window closed. So that if Geneva fails and strikes come, Iran faces them from fortified positions rather than exposed ones. Now, let me show you what weeks-long campaign actually means in operational military terms. Because the phrase leaked to Reuters by 2 anonymous Pentagon officials 4 days ago has been repeated in every analysis since. But almost nobody has explained what executing weeks of sustained bombing against a country of 88 million people across War I, 6 million square kilometers actually requires. According to the Congressional Research Service analysis on Iran conflict scenarios, a sustained air campaign requires 4 operational components. Suppression of enemy air defenses, which is why the EA-18G Growlers are positioned at Muwafaq Salti. They jam Iranian radar, blind surface-to-air missile systems, create electronic dead zones that American strike aircraft exploit. Strike packages, which is why F-15E Strike Eagles and carrier-based F-A-18s and F-35Cs are prepositioned. They deliver precision-guided munitions against the target list Netanyahu provided to Trump. Bunker-busting missions, which is why B-2 Spirit bombers at Diego Garcia carry MOPs specifically. They penetrate underground facilities that conventional bombs cannot reach. Hand combat search and rescue, which is why A-10 Thunderbolts are in Jordan. If a pilot ejects over Iranian territory, the A-10s provide close air support for extraction. These 4 components running simultaneously for weeks requires logistics most people cannot visualize. According to analysis of Operation Desert Storm, the most intensive, sustained air campaign since World War II, America flew approximately 2,500 sorties per day for 42 days against Iraq, a country with less sophisticated air defenses than Iran has today, using an air force that included dozens of coalition partners providing airfields, overflight rights, and support aircraft. Against Iran today, America has 2 carriers, providing 280 combined sorties per day maximum. 4 forward bases at Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Diego Garcia, and Oman providing land-based aircraft. The Gulf Arab, states nervous about oil disruption and proxy retaliation. No NATO coalition, no United Nations mandate, operating alone except for Israel. To sustain weeks of bombing under those conditions requires the 112 C-17 loads of ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and personnel that satellite tracking and WSWS analysis documented arriving in theater weeks ago. It requires the 20 KC-135 Stratotanker refueling aircraft at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar that Middle East Forum identified positioned there since January 22nd. It requires the mine countermeasure ships USS Canberra, Tulsa, and Santa Barbara ready to clear Hormuz if Iran mines it. It requires submarine-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles from the 4 Ohio-class SSGNs potentially in theater, 616 potential Tomahawks. From underwater, undetectable until launch. Weeks long means all of this, activated, sustained, for 14 to 21 days minimum. Possibly longer if Iran's hardening proves more effective than estimated. Possibly shorter if Iran's government collapses faster than expected. But nobody plans for shorter. Plans assume maximum resistance, maximum retaliation, maximum international complications, and Iran's fortification is designed to force exactly maximum resistance. Buried tunnel entrances require multiple strikes to penetrate. Concrete sarcophagi require bunker busters rather than conventional bombs. Facilities disguised by soil covering require intelligence confirmation before striking to avoid hitting empty mountains. Every layer of hardening Iran adds is another sortie required, another weapon expended, another risk accepted, another day the campaign extends. Now let me show you the physics of what happens when a 30,000-pound MOP traveling near supersonic velocity hits the concrete sarcophagus Iran built over Parchin Taligan II. Because understanding the weapon versus target interaction explains both why Iran's hardening is insufficient and why it matters anyway. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator is not an explosive in the traditional sense. It is a kinetic energy weapon with explosive charge. The bomb's casing is hardened steel. The weight, 30,000 pounds, is mostly dense metal designed to maintain velocity and momentum through impact. When the MOP hits reinforced concrete, the steel casing does not shatter. It penetrates. The kinetic energy of 14 tons traveling at hundreds of miles per hour converts into penetrating force. The concrete cracks. The steel advances. Deeper. The bomb's fuse is delayed. The detonation occurs inside the target, not on the surface. Maximum structural damage to underground facilities. Minimum wasted energy on surface effects. Against standard 5,000 psi reinforced concrete, the MOP penetrates approximately 60 feet before detonation. Against Iran's 30,000 psi ultra-high strength concrete, penetration is less, approximately 15 to 20 feet according to materials engineering analysis. Still sufficient for most targets, because the concrete sarcophagus Iran built over Parchin, while thicker than standard construction, is probably not deeper than 30 to 40 feet at its thickest point. Constructing 60 feet of solid reinforced concrete in 94 days is not feasible. Pouring, curing, reinforcing, and waterproofing that volume of concrete requires more time than Iran had. So the MOP probably penetrates the sarcophagus, probably reaches the building beneath, probably detonates inside the structure housing the 36-meter high explosives containment vessel, probably destroys it, probably is not certainty, and probably is enough to make the operation harder to justify politically. Because if one MOP fails to detonate properly, if one bomb hits at suboptimal angle due to wind or targeting error, if the concrete proves thicker than estimated, the target survives, and surviving targets require restrikes. Restrikes extend the campaign. Extended campaigns accumulate casualties. Accumulated casualties erode domestic support. Eroded domestic support creates political vulnerability. Iran's concrete sarcophagus might not stop the MOP, but it might stop the political will to use the MOP, which is almost the same thing. And this is the historical parallel that satellite imagery analysts have been citing since the Reuters satellite analysis published this morning. Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 1991, facing American air power after invading Kuwait. Saddam's military engineers buried command bunkers under Baghdad, reinforced aircraft shelters, dispersed weapons, hardened infrastructure, all visible in satellite imagery before Operation Desert Storm began. Did the hardening save Saddam? No. America bombed Iraq for 42 days. The hardened facilities took damage. The buried bunkers eventually collapsed. The war ended with Iraqi military destruction and Kuwait liberated. But the hardening extended the campaign, required more sorties, produced more bomb damage assessment difficulties, created more post-strike uncertainty about what survived, made victory more expensive and less clean than it would have been against exposed targets. Iran studied that war, studied the hardening, studied what worked and what did not, and applied 33 years of engineering improvement to building facilities that might survive longer than Saddam's did. Not forever, longer. Long enough that the political cost exceeds the strategic benefit, long enough that Trump decides a deal, even an imperfect deal, is preferable to weeks of bombing with uncertain outcomes and certain international condemnation. This is Iran's calculation. And the satellites are documenting that calculation being made physical in concrete, in soil, in backfilled tunnel entrances and buried weapons development facilities right now. While Trump decides whether the carrier deployment is leverage that produces a deal or a prelude to the campaign that 2 Pentagon officials leaked 4 days ago. Now let me show you the international pressure dimension that makes Iran's hardening strategy potentially viable even against superior American firepower. Because the concrete at Parchin and the buried tunnels at Isfahan are not just military defenses. They are diplomatic weapons. When satellite images show Iran pouring concrete over nuclear facilities, the international narrative becomes Iran is preparing for American aggression. When satellite images show America loading bombers with bunker busters, the narrative becomes America is preparing to attack. Both narratives coexist. But which one dominates international perception depends on sequencing. If Iran's fortification imagery precedes American strikes, Iran's defensive preparation looks justified after the fact. If American bombing campaign imagery precedes any Iranian military response, American preemptive action looks disproportionate. Iran is racing to ensure its hardening is visible and documented before any strikes occur, so that when Reuters, AP, and satellite companies publish before and after bombing damage images, the story includes Iran had prepared defenses for months. America struck anyway. Casualties resulted from American choice to attack fortified positions rather than negotiate. That narrative matters to Russia and China, both permanent Security Council members, both opposed to American unilateral military action against a country with which they have economic and strategic relationships. Russia joined Iran's Hormuz drill yesterday. China sent a Type 055 destroyer. Both nations are signaling, we support Iran diplomatically and potentially materially if America strikes. That signal creates international political cost for strikes. Not immediately, eventually. After the bombing, after the casualties, after the oil price spike, after Hormuz disruption, after Iran activates Hezbollah and Houthis and Iraqi militias, Russia and China at the Security Council saying, we warned America. America chose unilateral aggression. The consequences are America's fault. This is the international environment Iran's fortification helps create. Not one that prevents American strikes. One that makes American strikes politically costlier internationally. Makes building post-strike consensus harder. Makes sanctions reimposition more difficult if Iran reconstitutes its program afterward. Makes American strategic position weaker even if the bombing succeeds militarily. Iran cannot stop American bombers, but Iran can shape the international political environment in which those bombers operate. The concrete sarcophagus at Parchin is simultaneously military defense and diplomatic messaging. Targeted at American voters who see images of fortified facilities being destroyed, at Gulf Arab governments who see preparation that suggests prolonged conflict, at European allies who see escalation they cannot support, at Asian energy importers who see oil supply risk, at everyone whose political pressure on Trump might make the military option harder to sustain than the military operation itself. 24 days remain on Trump's March 12th deadline. The fort arrives in 6 days. Geneva talks continue through Friday at least. Concrete continues being poured at Pickaxe Mountain. Tunnel entrances at Isfahan remain buried. The Parchin sarcophagus is complete. And in Washington, in the Pentagon, in the office, where operational plans become operational orders, someone is deciding whether 94 days of Iranian concrete work changes the assessment of weeks-long campaign feasibility. Whether the hardened targets require more MOPs than current inventory provides, whether the replacement MOPs being manufactured under the $100 million contract signed 11 days ago should have been ordered years ago, whether the hardening visible in satellite imagery is primarily military obstacle or primarily political messaging, and whether the answer to that question changes anything about what happens when Trump's deadline expires and Geneva has produced nothing Trump can call a deal. The satellites will capture that too, the B-2s taking off from Diego Garcia, the Tomahawks launching from submarines, the F-15Es departing Muwafaq Salti, the explosions at Parchin and Isfahan and Pickaxe Mountain, the concrete sarcophagus being penetrated or surviving, the tunnel entrances being excavated or remaining sealed, the 36-meter high explosives containment vessel being destroyed or protected, all of it visible from space, all of it recorded by commercial satellites whose imagery Reuters and Planet Labs and ISIS and every analyst watching this crisis will publish within hours, just like they published the fortification imagery this morning, 4 hours ago, showing exactly what Iran built while talking, while stalling, while buying time measured in concrete and soil and buried tunnel entrances. The race the satellites documented is not over. 24 days remain. Fortification continues. Campaign planning continues. And both sides are building toward the same deadline. One side hardening facilities, one side loading weapons, both preparing for the test that concrete and penetration and 94 days of emergency construction versus 30 years of bunker buster development finally answer. The satellites saw it all. The question is whether the concrete was enough.